Hello and welcome. Today I want to do a video talking about something that has been an issue that I've been struggling with for probably the last 15 years now when it comes to game development with this particular engine. So for the last 15 years now, almost 16 years, I've been making video games with RPG Maker VX. And while that is a fairly powerful engine, it is also fairly limited. It's old. It's outdated at this point. Um, there isn't really anything that this engine can do that the other engines can't, and they can do it a lot better. Um, but I've accumulated 15 years worth of experience with this engine, with both the mapping style, the programming language, the data structure, and so this is what I know, and this is what I've developed a certain mastery over. However, one of the biggest issues with RPG Maker VX is with its control scheme and how controls are structured. And there's a bit of a weird gimmick with games made with RPG Maker that is very frustrating for players when trying to describe the controls of a game to someone. And what that gimmick is that when you change the controls of one game made with this engine, you change the controls for every game made with that engine. And I'll give you an example. So I'm going to go into Bloodstained Hands here, which is the first full-length game I made with RPG Maker VX. And once this loads up, I'm going to open up the Game Properties tab by pressing F1. So the game's loaded, I've opened up the Game Properties, and if you scroll over to the Gamepad tab, you will see button 1 through 10 is assigned to these are essentially in-game buttons or inputs, which determine various functions that take place in the game. So, for example, L and R would be changing categories. The B button opens up the menu. The A button, selects. It's your general action key or your selection key. I actually don't know if that's the correct configurations, but you get the idea. Is that the inputs? These inputs are assigned to in-game functions, but the buttons, the way the gamepad works is that if you plug in a controller, like a PlayStation controller or an Xbox controller, these buttons are configured to buttons on that controller. So I think for like an Xbox controller, it would be A, B, X, Y, L, R, select, and start. And then on a PlayStation controller, it would be like circle, X, square, triangle, or something like that. I'm not exactly sure what that is. And then 9 and 10 is the left stick and the right stick click buttons. And so that's what the Gamepad tab does. But the Keyboard tab is the same thing, but instead of buttons on a controller, it's assigned to these 15 keys on the keyboard. So you can map these 15 keys to any game input. That's basically how RPG Maker VX handles button mapping and input. But there's a problem with this. Let's go to the Gamepad tab as an example here. So as you can see, I have my buttons configured to A, B, C, X, L, R, X, Y. Now if I reset this, so now it's A, B, C, X, Y, Z, L, R, and I close this, and I open up a different game. Oh, whoops, that's not what I meant to do. If I open up a different game made with RPG Maker, in this case Thrall, and I open up the Game Properties tab in this game, you will see that the gamepad has kept those configurations, A, B, C, X, Y, Z, L, R. And now if I change them back here, so let's say I'm going to change 5 through 8 to L, R, Y, Z, and then I go back to Bloodstained Hands, and I open up the Game Properties tab in this window, once it loads. My computer is a little bit slow today. Open up the Game Properties tab in this window, you can see that those configurations have been saved. This is an interesting little feature that has caused a lot of developers with this engine an incredible amount of frustration, myself included, because what that means is that let's say that the A button is the general action key, or the A input. Well, um, if I'm giving a tutorial in the game of how to, let's actually use a better example. In Bloodstained Hands, the L input is the button you press to escape battles. Now, if I'm giving a tutorial in the game of how to escape a battle, because you can map this L button to anything, and it saves those configurations across this entire platform, I can't just say that, you press left trigger or whatever to escape combat, because if somebody has reassigned those buttons and remapped those buttons in a different game made within this engine, then that won't actually translate into this game. Now I could say press the L button, referring to the in-game input, but unless you actually understand this whole gamepad tab situation, that would be fairly confusing, because on the keyboard, the L button is assigned to the Q key. So if you're playing with a keyboard and the game says press the L button to escape and you're pressing L, well, that's not going to do anything. You need to press Q. But again, I can't just say press Q, because if you've assigned the L button to a different configuration in a different game made with the same engine, Q is not going to have the same function. So this has been an issue with RPG Maker VX for the last 15 years for me, because I have not figured out a way to be able to determine how a player has mapped their keyboard and their gamepad, determine whether or not they're actually using a controller or a keyboard, and then on top of that, output something different in game to properly display what control is assigned to which function. Until recently. Last weekend, I found a way to do just that. And it was thanks to a script that I'd found in the paste bin of an RPG Maker community member by the name of Zeriab. Their handle is Zeriab. I think it's... Anyway, it doesn't matter. Zeriab's been a longtime active member of the RPG Maker community and has achieved quite a reputation of being very supportive and very helpful and very friendly, as well as a very prolific scripter. And Zeriab's I actually reached out to Zeriab specifically about this script because I was trying to find a way to get it to work, and I was having trouble doing so. But before he was able to respond, I actually was able to figure it out myself in kind of my own unique way. But I found in Zeriab's paste bin an old script that allows you to read the F1 settings, the gamepad, the game properties settings inside a game. This is the wrong game. I need to go to Thrall. This is where I've got it. So this is the script. This was found in Zeriab's pastebin, and I don't actually understand exactly everything about what this script does, but I've understood enough about it to make it do what I need it to do. So from what I can tell, he's got two modules here, the utility module, and he actually created an input module, which from what I can see actually overwrites the entire input module and therefore actually changes the way certain controls work. I noticed that with this particular code here, my movement scheme was getting a little bit wonky and it wasn't as responsive as I'd like it to be. But I'll try to keep this as simple as I possibly can here. So from what I have been able to determine, this script, particularly everything up to here, actually reads the properties that the player has assigned on their own computer for an RPG Maker VX game. And then it outputs those properties, those configurations, into an array full of, I don't know what you would call these, but they're not binary values, but they're not exactly hex either. I'll call them keys because I think that's the most accurate way I could describe these. An array of keys that actually determines what the player has assigned to each individual button or key on the keyboard. And I'm going to show you what I mean. Give me 1 second here. Okay, we're back. So I have now opened up the registry editor. And this file right here, which this script looks for within the proper file location, is all the configurations for the Game Properties tab. I believe it is these settings here. These are different settings within the same Game Properties Game Properties window, but the gamepad and keyboard tabs especially are saved into here. And these are the same keys that you kind of see here. It's the 0x and then it adds the key to it. What I was able to figure out was if you open up a game and you go to your Game Properties window and you go to the Gamepad tab, you can tell just from these first 10 settings what each key translates to. So for example, because they are all in order, and I'll kind of see if I can drag this in a way where it's visible. So you can see the first 10 keys should translate. Oh, come on now. There we go. The first 10 keys should translate to the first 10 buttons on the Gamepad tab. So A would have the key 0B, B would have the key 0C, C would be 0D, X is 0E, Y is 0F, and I'll explain that a little bit further by making the first 5 of them all B, and then I will reset this to kind of show you what I mean. I think I have to close the window for that to save. Yep, there we go. So I changed the first 5 gamepad options to B, and the first 5 options here now are 0C, 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 0C. So by doing that, I was able to figure out what key corresponds to which in-game input. And then in doing so, by determining which button on the Gamepad tab actually coordinates with buttons on an actual controller, I was able to essentially take this entire output as an array, and then in doing so, pass it through to other scripts, be able to access that array from other scripts and even in-game script calls that then allow me to output my own, I guess, I'm trying to kind of dance around this, but essentially what I did was I created a series of icons, as you can see here, that coincide with buttons on a game controller for both an ABXY layout or XO square triangle layout, as well as all the mappable keys on a keyboard. And by figuring out how a player has configured those controls by reading them from the registry, checking where those controls are allocated within that array that gets outputted from that script, I'm able then to match that position within that array to a separate array, which has within it icons, icon indexes. And by returning that icon index, I can then output the correct button prompt in the game based on how a player has their own controls configured. I'm trying to find the best way to describe this, and it's a little bit tricky because it is very technical, and I'm trying to make it as understandable as possible. However, there is one issue with this. Well, there's two, but I will go into the first issue. First off, we do not need the original script anymore because this is actually, that's the original. What I basically did, I only took the first part of the script, which was what reads the registry, and then passing it into a different module that essentially sets that as an array. And from there, I then determine whether or not the player has assigned that they are using a controller, which controller type, or if they're using a keyboard. And then from there, reading the registry, checking to see what button is actually assigned to that, and then outputting an icon based on that position within the array. The problem with this is if there is no registry file. So if you actually delete that registry file where all the button inputs are, the first time you boot up the game, first of all, your controls will actually be set to the default, but until you actually close the game, that registry file will not be created. It only gets created after you've closed the game. So once I close this, there, now the button assignment is there. So if a player is booting up the game for the very first time, and the game is trying to read a file from the registry that doesn't exist, it doesn't output correctly, which means that if someone boots up this game for the very first time and they just go straight into it and they get to that tutorial with that button output, it's going to output something. I did a bit of a failsafe where I had a icon that gets outputted just in case it can't find anything. However, I found a way around that as well, which is that when I'm outputting that array in the first place, I actually assign the original output. So in the original script, this line of code here is what gets returned when creating that array of F1 settings. I assigned that to a variable instead, and then I check to see what the size of the array is. And if it's equal to 255, that means there is no registry file. If it's equal to anything else, that means there is a registry file. If there is a registry file, I return the configurations within that file. If there is not, I actually return my own custom array that has those default settings, so that no matter what, the game will always be able to draw something that outputs something correctly. There is one other issue with this, but before I get into that, I kind of want to show you how this works. I know this is really technical and probably doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's something I'm actually really excited about because it has taken me a long time to figure out how to do this. So the way this works, if I go to the keyboard tab, you can see that L and R are assigned to the Q and W keys. So if I go into the menu and I go to my item window, to change categories is the Q and the W keys, as you can see. Now if I go to change my input, I actually created a script within the settings script that I'm using that allows you to change your input, whether you want to use a keyboard, a controller with an ABXY config, or OX square triangle. So I'm going to go to AB, and if I go to the gamepad tab, you can see that L and R is assigned to 7 and 8, which I do believe is select and start. So if I set it to AB and I go to items, you can see those button prompts now change to select and start on what would be an Xbox controller. And if I set it to O and X, you can see that it changes to select and start on a PlayStation controller. Again, using custom icons that I created specifically for those outputs. Now, the other thing that you can do, what if I change these? Let's say I go to the keyboard tab. Let's say I don't want Q and W to change categories. Let's say I want A and S to do it. So I'll change A to L and S to R, and then Q to X and W to Y. Now if I go back to the keyboard setting and I open the item window, you can see that it's still Q and W. That is the other problem with this, is that because the registry file is not updated until you close the game, if you change the settings in the game, it does not get updated until you've actually done a hard reset. Even a soft reset just by pressing F12 does not work. You actually do need to do a hard reset. So if I close the game and then reopen it, keeping in mind now that I've assigned A and S to the L and R buttons instead of Q and W, I should still have the keyboard config set up. So when I open up the item window, you can see that A and S are now the correct inputs for that. And this can be done for any button in the game, whether it's to change categories, whether it's to display a prompt to, I'll actually give you another example here. Let's say in this particular game, if you find a special if you find a weapon, it opens up this loot table, and now I can display that the Q key opens up the comparison window, while the A and S keys change the categories. So now, instead of providing a generic input that the player then has to figure out what their controls are mapped to, I can actually read what the player has their controls mapped to and then output that control instead of the in-game input. That took 15 years to figure out, mostly because I didn't know about this script, and even when I didn't actually know how it worked. And truth be told, I'm not even using this script in its entirety. I just realized this wasn't commented out, which means I was running the original script, but that's okay. I was using this one for the majority of it. I'm not using the majority of the script, though. The only code that I'm actually using from Zariab's original script is this module, and only the first method within the module. But yeah, that is essentially how I figured out how to read player button mapping, regardless of whether or not they changed the controls in a different game, and then output them in this game to display the correct button prompt. I'm sorry if that was really technical. I'm sorry if that was very hard to understand and very dry and boring, but I was really excited about this. This is something that's taken me a long time to figure out, so I was really excited about it, and I wanted to share it with you. Yeah, I'm going to be doing more of this in Thrall to actually make sure that there's no confusion. Whether a player starts a brand new game from scratch and has never played an RPG Maker game before and does not have this button assignment file in the registry, or if they've played RPG Maker VX games a ton of time and they've configured all their controls to exactly how they want it on the keyboard, this game will make sure that all of those controls are properly displayed with correct prompts, no matter what the player does with them. So that's it for today. I was really excited about that and I wanted to share. So hope you have a great day, and I will see you next time.